Okay, welcome back to the last session of the final day of the Nursing Leadership Seminar. In this section, we will be looking at nursing compliance surveys, readiness 3 and 4. And our usual presenter, Mrs. Carnegie, again to do these two final presentations. Over to you, Mrs. Carnegie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. And thank you once again to my administrators and to our students and other healthcare professionals who are joining us today. We appreciate your presence and we hope that you will benefit greatly from the information that we share today. We do ask that you connect with us. We are available on various social media sites, including Instagram, TikTok. We have conference website and the college website. We also have a YouTube channel for Conversations with Carrie. And we have the college website, College of Health and Allied Development. We're also present on LinkedIn at College of Health and Allied Development and at Carrie Ann Carnegie or Conversations with Carrie. So we look forward to connecting with you on these sites where you can get additional educational information and just insights from time to time. Also, we encourage you to look out for our next location where we will be having our our next nursing leadership seminar will be in Toronto, Canada. The topic will be nursing leadership role and function in the success of an organization. All right, and so that will be for February 8 and 9, Toronto, Canada. So we look forward to seeing you there. We will also continue to extend the online participation. Okay, we also have additional locations. I'm not sure why it seems to have gone away, but we also are looking, we're also having additional conferences. We're looking forward to Jamaica in May. We'll also be in Connecticut in May. We'll be back in New York in September. And we have Georgia. And we also have short courses that are available through College of Health and Allied Development. So you can look out for that. We invite you to apply for any one of our conferences, seminars, or short courses at College of Health and Allied Development. The website is www.chadedu.org, and we look forward to being of value to you and to your organization. And so we want to welcome you back for this is part 3 of our nursing leadership and compliance seminar. And in this section, we're going to be speaking about non-compliance. And we're going to, before we get into response and remedies, we really want to get a little more into the different categories of non-compliance and what that looks like. Okay, the different categories of non-compliance and exactly what that looks like. I think I figured out what the challenge that we're having is. We have an extended view, and so we're not able to see the extended view. So we'll have to make the corrections to that. So we apologize for the way you are viewing our presentations right now. Okay, so before we get into the categories of non-compliance and some of the patient responses that may trigger non-compliance or even immediate jeopardy, citations, and also staff actions that can trigger non-compliance and maybe even immediate jeopardy, citations. And then when we get into part 4, we're going to look at response and remedies before we look into wrap up. Okay, I just think it's very important for us to understand the different categories, and just to give some examples of real life events and circumstances and the impact that it has had on the patients, the facility, and the wider society. Okay. And so, first, to recapitulate what we've completed so far, we looked at non-compliance, and we established that non-compliance is identified through observation, interview, and also through patient record review. Okay, so that it is sometimes called chart reviews. Okay. We also established that for non-compliance, as the scope and severity must also be established. Okay, and the scope is asking about how widespread it is, and severity speaks to whether is harm was present and also the extent of the harm. Um, Non-compliance also establishes whether there were actual or potential impacts to the patient or to the resident, and these must be established. The impacts speaks to whether there was injury, harm, impairment, or death. Okay, and as I just want to repeat, it can be actual harm, injury, impairment, or death, or it could be potential harm, injury, impairment, or death. Okay, but the impact must be established. There are different types of impacts. Okay, there are physical impacts, mental impacts, emotional impacts, and also psychosocial impacts. And so, what we want to do in this segment is to outline the categories of non-compliance and to give some examples of what would trigger the non-compliance. So the different categories are abuse, quality of life, infection control, and environmental or structural non-compliance. Okay, so as we go through, I want you to be able to highlight 2 areas. Number 1, we've already established the category. The first category we're going to look at is abuse. Then we're going to tell the resident experience or outcome that would qualify as non-compliance in the category of abuse. And then we're going to speak about the staff action or the facility action that could actually trigger an abuse citation. Okay, so the experience of the patient and the actions of the staff or the facility are also determinants of whether or not a non-compliance does exist. So under abuse, and I'm just giving you some examples, they're not all inclusive, but wherever these particular resident experience exist, there is potential. Number 1, there's non-compliance, and number 2, in terms of severity, there is also what we consider to be immediate jeopardy. So any non-consent any non-consensual sexual contact, okay, such as unwanted intimate touching, sexual assault, or sexual battery. All right, and these are once again assault. I find it's very useful to establish what assault is, because in layman's term, assault seems to be something that is physical, but no, assault is a threat. So if someone feels threatened sexually or is made to feel uncomfortable because of another person, it is deemed to be non-consensual sexual assault. Okay, now battery is if it includes unwanted touching or even intercourse. Okay, so non-consensual sexual contact, whether it be intimate touching, assault, as in the person feeling that they're at risk of uh, risk of being violated. That's the term I'm looking for, violated, or if there was actual violation through touching. Okay. Another abuse activity that would trigger an immediate jeopardy are unexplained head or body trauma. So, in the healthcare facilities, there are times where they look for what is called injuries of unknown origin. Okay, this is an example of what that is. You have injuries that are unexplained and unknown. Okay, we don't know how it happens. And facilities, what they do is have constant skin checks. Okay, the skin check is done at the end of and at the beginning of each shift, and then there are scheduled skin checks that are done at least on a weekly basis for most of the facilities that I've been associated with. All right, and so what they're looking for is to quickly identify if there has been any unexplained trauma to the body, whether it's to the head, the face, or other parts of the body, or unexplained fractures. And then this is one example of a time when investigation would begin before a survey. Okay, and here is where the facility would self-report, conduct their investigations, and the state would come in and conduct their own survey to find if this is what they call substantiated, meaning yes, did exist, or unsubstantiated, meaning they found a reason for it and the reason does not indicate that this patient was indeed abused. Okay. Another activity are bruises around the breast or genital area or unexplained bruising. Okay. Now, this is one that is kind of hard to explain, but it's very important, especially if you are a nursing supervisor or a nursing manager or a director of nurses, to understand. Typically, the supervisors, administrators, etc., they meet with every single patient or resident at some point in time. And when a patient gives a complaint or a concern and they use certain terms, these would trigger an immediate abuse investigation. So if the person expresses being afraid of a person or being afraid of going to a particular place, it automatically triggers an abuse investigation. If a patient complains of being afraid of being left alone or of being in the dark, then these automatically trigger an abuse investigation. If the person has reports of disturbed sleep or nightmares, these are also activities and events that would trigger an abuse investigation. Now, an investigation is conducted because we do not have the answers, and the investigation will outline exactly what it is that happened. Okay, the abuse may be within the facility, or it may be external to the facility. The important thing is, whenever these words like fear comes into play, or behaviors such as disturbed sleep or nightmare, then it is telling that this patient is being affected on a cognitive or psychological level, and these are threats to the patient's safety and ought to be investigated. Once again, an abuse, sometimes, patients have these behaviors, and it would indicate maybe that an abuse took place sometimes, in their past life. Now, it's also important that the investigation does continue and is completed explicitly to the end, all right, without fear of the organization. Because I've been involved in some investigations that shows that it was a person's figment of their imagination, or it was the memory of a past abusive event. The important thing is that when it arises, remember, this is typically abuse on a whole affects the person psychologically. And so once we recognize the psychological impact on the patient, then proper psychiatric, psychological, or medical care can be instituted to help the patient with recovery and getting back to enjoying good quality of life. Okay, so the investigation an a potential or a suspicion of an abuse as a result of these words or activities does not necessarily mean it's an indictment on the facility. Okay, but what we're doing is identifying the impact of an event, of a psychological event on the patient, and allowing the patient to get treatment for it. Okay, there was one event where a patient was admitted to the ICU, and the patient was unconscious. Okay, and they needed to place a Foley catheter in the patient. A relative for that patient was present. However, because of the age of the patient and the patient's limbs were not nimble, and so they had to support the patient's legs in the open and up positions, and there were attempts, at least two attempts, to insert the Foley catheter. Now, when the patient came around, the patient reported that she was raped. So, of course, this was reported and investigation ensued. And it was revealed that it was that event. Okay, the patient was unconscious, was not able to respond, but somehow became aware of what was happening. And of course, placing a Foley catheter, it's in a delicate part of the person's body. But the fact that her legs were open, her underwear removed, her legs were held in position for another person to site the IV, the sensation that the person got was that she was being raped. Okay, so the investigation revealed that it was not actually a rape event, but it was at the time when the Foley catheter was being placed. Okay. And then, of course, we have other cases of potential abuse, okay, where once again, a behavior, extreme pain, crying out during sleep. All right. And I think this one is very well known when that patient who's been in a vegetative state for 10 to 14 years, the news media, some say more than 10 years, some say for approximately 14 years, gave birth. And how did they know this person was giving birth? because of the level of pain she was feeling and was crying out. This patient was in a vegetative state, non-responsive, but suddenly there were groanings coming from her, which was unusual. And then the descriptors that I've had does not say that like they heard a baby crying or anything like that, but obviously there was a presence of another little human being. And so it was identified that this person, because of their vegetative state, could not have consented to a sexual contact. So that was indeed a sexual battery. All right. And so these are some of the resident outcome or experiences that we need to look out for. Um, another behavior that could signify that this person is has possibly experienced abuse is if there's an extreme change in their behavior, or if their behavior suddenly becomes disruptive, if they become withdrawn and isolated, and if there are attempts to run away or even talk of suicide, or in some cases, even suicide attempts. Okay, so these are some resident experiences and outcomes that would indicate abuse. And if these are validated as being an abusive experience, then it would qualify at the immediate jeopardy level. Okay. And where there is immediate jeopardy, it's category 3 or category 2 uh, remedy that would be enforced. Okay. Now, there are staff actions that could actually qualify as being abusive, okay, and could cause an immediate jeopardy citation to the facility. If a staff is demeaning to a patient or a resident, if the patient feels that the staff is threatening or intimidating, all right, or if the staff humiliates the patient or resident in any way, if the staff physically abuses the patient in any way, okay, being rough with the patient, for example, okay, can be deemed physical abuse. Okay, if the staff takes pictures or shares pictures of an explicit nature of the resident. I remember there a couple of years ago, there was a case where some staff members went to the morgue and took pictures of bodies, uh, uh, body parts of the deceased. Okay, and those staff members were identified, and of course the facility got a tag, but those staff members were also released from their duties. So taking, sharing, or posting of sexually explicit photographs of residents, okay, any act of rape, sodomy, or sexual assault of a resident. And remember, as we established, sexual assault doesn't mean touching, it means threat of. Okay, so gestures, suggestions, words, okay, that makes this person feel uncomfortable or at risk for sexual battery is abuse. Okay, staff or facility action that would be also deemed abusive or contributing to abuse would be failure to investigate any allegations. So if there is an allegation of abuse, or if there are expressions of fear, an investigation must ensue, right? It's best to, as the example that I gave earlier, that the investigation goes through and it's identified that there is no abuse incident, okay, rather than for there to be an allegation that is not investigated and it is indeed an abuse to the patient, because of course the consequences will become more dire. An abusive activity also is if a patient is confined to a room either because of a threat, okay, your behavior is disruptive, I'm going to put you in your room until you learn to behave yourself. And they take the patient, put the patient in their room, shut the door, okay? That is confinement, and that's also blockade, okay? Now, confinement by a device can also be deemed abuse. And so it is very important that whatever devices are being used on a patient, whether it's for patient care or otherwise, the patient is able to remove it, or it is removed as soon as the use is completed. One example, those over bed trays that are used for patient meals. Now, because of the designs of the beds, okay, there are times when you put uh, that overbed tray across the bed, the patient sits up and eats, but sometimes because of the design of the bed, the patient is not able to put it away. So now they do not have access maybe to their lower body, and this tray now becomes a confinement for them. Okay. And so it's very important that number one, we monitor the patients. So as soon as the patient is finished eating, that tray is removed, or we teach the patient exactly how to remove the tray if they are teachable. All right. So a device can become a, a confinement, or create a threat of confinement, which can, if not handled properly, can be deemed abuse. All right. And so this is the first area. There are very many other examples that we could give, but I wanted to just highlight some of the ones that they may appear very simple. However, when it comes to the definitions and the of harm, okay, that can actually trigger a citation. It's very important to recognize these activities, both on from the staff level and in terms of patient experience, that can trigger an immediate jeopardy citation in the category of abuse. Okay, then we're going to speak about the next category, which is the quality of care. Now, this category is really big because, once again, this is a category that examines actual patient care. And when we talk about patient care, it can include any member of the care facility. So it could be this nursing assistant, it could be the registered nurse, it could be the physician, all right? And everyone participates in preventing any quality of care or quality of life citation. So I'm going to go through as much as possible um, some of the patient experiences, and then we're going to look at the staff or facility actions that could trigger what is called a quality of life or quality of care citation. So, in terms of resident outcome or experience, you'll have unexpected death, which is due to facility non-compliance. So, if there's an area identified as being non-compliant and the patient dies as a result of this, then yes, that's an immediate jeopardy tag. Any activity that causes a patient to withdraw or isolate themselves or feel guilt or shame or depression or speaks of suicide or attempts to run away can be considered a quality of life experience that would trigger an immediate jeopardy. This may seem very simple, but consider this. Someone who, when they were alert, oriented, rational, and independent, took very good care of themselves and take pride in their appearance. And now they have a soil on their clothes and they're asking for their clothes. Well, number one, when we see the soil, we should want to remove that soiled garment right away. But it becomes worse if the person asks, can you assist me? I have a soil on my clothes. Can you assist me to change? And they're told, oh, I can't do that right now. You're going to have to wait. Okay. So this person begins to feel bad. They feel ashamed. They don't want to go into the activity hall. Okay, because they're conscious of the soil on their clothes. This is a quality of care or a quality of life experience that is causing psychological harm to the patient. Okay? Seems simple, all right? But it's very, very important. Okay, so any other activity that causes significant decline in the person's physical, mental, or psychosocial functioning that is avoidable and not due to the normal progression of disease or the aging process. One of the things we spoke about in the previous session is pain. A pain can restrict a person's movement. Pain will restrict a person's psychological comfort. Okay. And so pain is one of those areas that can trigger a quality of life or a quality of care immediate jeopardy tag. All right. If there is injury resulting in disfigurement, loss of limb, or unexpected somnolence or lethargy. All right. If there's also injury caused by an event that results from inadequate supervision. Yesterday, we spoke about staffing. Okay. So, inadequate supervision or failure to follow the plan of care for the patient. All of this goes into quality of life or quality of care. Another really big area is pressure ulcers. Pressure ulcers are deemed preventable. All right. There are instances where, because of the patient's physical condition, because of their nutritional or hydration status, they may be at very high risk for pressure ulcers. And there has to be enough documentation and test results to show that this pressure ulcer is not avoidable. Okay, and the doctor has to write a statement to that effect. All right, and so pressure ulcers are deemed avoidable because there are established standards of care to prevent pressure ulcer development. Okay. Now, another immediate jeopardy in terms of quality of life would be like choking, okay, or an emergency that that causes avoidable injury or harm. Example, we speak about choking as an example. Each employee in the healthcare environment should have at least a CPR certification. Okay, CPR certification. So if a resident is choking, anyone, the housekeeper, the CNA, the nurse, the physician, the anyone, okay, the human resource director, okay, the business office employee should be able to render emergency care to that patient to help to relieve them of the choking. So they all should be able to do the Heimlich maneuver, okay? So if the patient chokes and has an adverse outcome because there was no one available to perform the Heimlich maneuver, then that is a quality of care issue that will result in immediate jeopardy. In this case, actual harm came to the patient. All right. If there are care related issues such as toxicity or lack of administration or over medication of a patient that may cause delirium or other changes in mental status, that is an actual harm and will result in an IG tag under quality of care. Okay. Now, staff actions that can result in quality of care or quality of life tags, meaning this is what the nurses can do. It has nothing to do with the patient outcome, but this is the activity of the staff. Would be inappropriate use of mechanical lifts, if there are medication errors, failure to honor the resident's advance directives, failure to identify a change in the patient condition. Remember, we are in healthcare. The patient's condition can change at any time. Our responsibility is to identify the change and take action to protect and preserve the patient's life. Okay? Another quality of care action is failure to respond to the call bell in a reasonable amount of time, especially if, because the call bell was not answered, harm came to the patient. Okay, so sometimes when we're investigating patient falls, the patient would said, well, I called, but I couldn't wait any longer, so I was trying to get to the bathroom on my own. Okay, that's a quality of care tag that actually caused or had the potential to cause harm to the patient. Now, if the patient fell and there was no harm, then that would be good. But if they fell and we had to send them out to do a CT scan of the head because we don't know if they hit their heads, or if there is obvious physical injury like cuts, abrasions, or excruciating pain, then this is one of those events that would need to be self-reported. But this quality of care tag is deemed to be as a result of staff action because staff failed to respond to the call bell in a reasonable amount of time. Okay? Another staff action would be what is called unsafe discharge. Okay, so unsafe discharge is when the patient is being discharged to a lower level of care. It could be to an assisted living facility or to home or to a halfway house or whatever the situation is. And wherever it is that they're being discharged to, there is not enough there is not the ability to safely continue the care of the patient. Okay, so whether the place will have insufficient trained staff or the needs of the patient will otherwise not be met. Okay, that's another example of staff action that can cause immediate jeopardy. All right. And we're going to look at the next section. The next section is infection control. Now, we know infection control got special attention uh, in recent years as a result of COVID. Okay. And there are extensive expectations of healthcare facilities, and the surveillance for infection control has become more strict. And instead of just coming during survey periods to evaluate the infection control, this is something that reports are expected every week. Okay. And so healthcare facilities are expected to complete infection surveillance forms and report infections, especially COVID related infections within their facilities. However, the facilities may be deemed non-compliant with infection control practices if there is uncontrolled spread of communicable disease or infection. And some examples are failure to institute surveillance activities or failure to institute an immunization program for the residents. Now, the immunization program for the staff is optional because the staff can get their own private uh, immunizations, but the facility um, should at least offer. But when it comes to the patients or residents, at certain times of the year, usually between September and March, the residents are offered flu vaccines and the pneumonia vaccines. Now, the pneumonia vaccine is offered every 5 years. And so the surveillance and the offer is done every year, typically at a certain period of time. But if the person was deemed to have had the pneumonia vaccine within the past 5 years, then the offer would not be made to that patient or resident. Give me just a moment, please. Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I see where I only have 10 minutes to go. And so we're going to, in that 10 minutes, wrap up with looking on the environmental aspects. And so when it comes to the environmental, we are looking at the categories that often trigger non-compliance and non-compliance at the level of immediate jeopardy. All right. And most of the times we focus on abuse, quality of care, and there is infection control. Now, as we spoke about infection control, even though the surveillance has increased since the advent of COVID, there are certain basic things that remain that could trigger uh, an, a non-compliance and IG tag is if there are no surveillance activities or if immunizations are not offered to the patient. When it comes to infection control, staff or facility action that can actually trigger an immediate jeopardy citation is if needles and syringes are used on more than one resident. Okay, and so there are established infection control practices that can trigger additional tags. But typically for immediate jeopardy, you're looking at the presence of surveillance activities and the system in place to ensure that the residents are offered the flu and pneumonia vaccines in a timely manner, and also if the staff action causes patients to be exposed to bloodborne infections by sharing of needles or syringes or any other finger stick or injection devices. Okay, so moving on now, we're going to look on the last section, which is environmental or structural. Now, the facility has a responsibility to ensure that the environment is safe. All right. And the resident experience that would trigger a non-compliance and even immediate jeopardy, meaning the patient experiences or is at risk for experiencing any injury, harm, or even death, include chemical burns. Okay, so there are established ways of managing chemicals in the healthcare environment. Any third degree burn, so there are established ways or means of controlling open flame or exposure to even sunlight or other material that uh, transmits heat. Okay, and we're looking at even unintended exposure to poisons or radiological agents. All right, exposure to excessive heat or cold. It is not unusual, especially for persons as they age, that their thermoregulation is not as great as when they were young. And sometimes they go outside, not intending to spend very long, but sometimes it's so comfortable and cool underneath that tree. And they stay there and they fall asleep. And so they may be exposed to excessive heat unintentionally, but exposure nevertheless. And for some reason, they may develop like a heat stroke, which is harm. Okay, so whether it was intentional or unintentional, the harm did occur, so it will trigger an IJ tag. All right, and of course, the use of restraints, okay, is one area, and yes, these fall under environmental as well. All right, including electric shock. Now, ah, one of the examples I gave in an earlier segment was about the facility that was closed because of unintended exposure to excessive heat during the hurricane. Okay, so the temperature of the atmosphere was higher than the regulated temperature, which caused harm also to the patient. Even though this was inside, the internal temperature of the patient is regulated and should remain at or below. There's a lower and a higher threshold for temperature. So the temperature needs to remain in that area. Okay, otherwise it could trigger an IJ tag. And staff and facility action, okay, that can trigger environmental related IJ tag or vendors or employees not being paid. Okay, there was a news event about this nursing facility that actually was not able to pay their staff. And many staff members left, but there were some staff members that kept going back to work just because of the residents. And that was amicably resolved. And of course, the staff members that who continued to show up for work were recognized for their contribution to humanity, of course. Other staff action could be lack of or inadequate emergency preparation. Now, this is quite avoidable, and it is very important. One of the things that we do, even when we have students and we take students into the environment, one of the things that we insist that they do is they need to identify the emergency related codes and facilities, so they know the exits, they know where to find the fire extinguishers, they know where to find the code cards, and then they have to verify that all the emergency supplies are on the code card, are are working properly, and of course is full, especially when it comes to the oxygen. It's not unusual for us to go into a facility, and as we're assisting them with either survey preparation, or if we take students there, to find the oxygen on the crash cart empty or close to empty. It's not unusual. And so systems need to be put in place to prevent all these categories of citations that we just spoke about, to prevent structures, strategies, okay, and routines must be in place to prevent and to quickly identify and to correct any non-compliance in the area of abuse, quality of care or quality of life, infection control, and of course, the environment. We thank you for your time and your attention. And I now hand over to Dr. Stewart, and I look forward to answering any questions that there may be following this segment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mrs. Carnegie. And I now open the floor to any questions that you might have at this time. If there's none, you could just type it in the chat so that we can make sure that there's none. Okay, Mrs. Carnegie, it seems like there's no question.
All right.
You were clear and to the point. I trust
Okay,
that
very good.
you learned. So, and there's no question. It means that you were very clear.
Okay, that's good. I hope that indeed is the situation. Okay, thank you for that, Miss Martin. Clear
Okay,
and
clear
informative.
and informative. Yeah, I suspected. Yeah. All right.
All right, so when we come back after this break, then we're going to delve into the remedies, and I'm going to also share with you some of the national results that we have available, just and I think I've spoken about it already, some of the civil monetary penalties, and we're going to look at the different categories of penalties, and indeed the response and the expectations of the responses when we come back.
Okay, so do you want to give them 10 minutes?
Okay, when is the next one scheduled to start?
Let me think. We are still ahead of time because there's no question.
Okay.
So we're scheduled to begin. Where have I posted this? Um, just checking to see where I posted this.
Sure.
Oh, here it is. So this one should have ended at 2:45. The next one is scheduled for 2:35.
Okay. So maybe we can do 2 o'clock instead.
2, okay. All right.
Okay. So I'll go 2 to 3 and then the evaluation.
Okay, good.
All right. Thank you so
All
much.
right, so we'll meet again at 3 p.m.
No,
Enjoy your
2 p.m.
2, 2, okay, 2 p.m. All right, enjoy your break.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let me take this off recording.